Welcome, my name is Burhan. I'm a project manager and a CSPC volunteer. It's my pleasure to introduce today Dr. Burhan Hussein, the program director of Canadian Black Scientists and a lecturer at Concordia University.
Thank you for welcoming me.
Thank you. I'm gonna start with my first question. What inspired you to create the decentralized innovation framework, and what specific program or gaps in Canadian innovation were you trying to bridge?
So the proposal that I submitted was inspired by my journey as a scientist and trying to understand the talent gap that's happening in the Canadian space. So I am a chemist that's undergone scientific training both in Canada and the UK. I've worked in lab settings, working with projects that are partnered with industry, as well as started to do community work. And throughout that whole space, I noticed a big pattern that happens, which is a lot of research that comes out of labs, especially from grad students and postdocs, end up going to the lab and publication, but they're not getting past that. So they're getting lost, not translating into society impact, so not coming out of labs. I wanted to understand why, and the evidence that I saw from trying to understand why was a big story came out of that, which is a lot of the innovation funding and infrastructure in Canada is centralized. So over 84%, for example, over 84% of funding from the CFI, so the Canadian Innovation Fund, goes only to 15 universities, so the U15. Additionally, the House of Commons Senate Committee for Science and Research also in 2024 showed that about 80% of federal research grants go to just those U15 universities. So seeing that, I realized that it was quite centralized, and looking at other national programs, I kept on seeing the same story happening in place, which is a lot of research or community-based research and non-traditional actors in the research ecosystem, such as libraries, science centers, and community organizations, as well as mission-driven organizations cannot easily access these funds and infrastructure. I also noticed when I went through and looked at the Canadian Forum for Social Innovation, they called the same thing, as well as ISED reports and the Institution of Research for Public Policy all had the same conclusion of inaccessibility of innovation infrastructure as well as funding to community organizations.
How does DIF complement existing funding and programs, and what policy adjustment would help integrate decentralized innovations framework like DIF with established funding and support from the government?
So the decentralized innovation framework is a proposed policy framework for funding infrastructure to go towards non-traditional actors in the ecosystem, in the innovation ecosystem. So this would be libraries, maker spaces, mission-driven organizations that are nonprofit, where they're the legitimate and resourced R&D hosts that can partner with industry, can partner with universities to try to solve the local problems that they're trying to address in their work. And what's nice about this framework is that it's not competing with existing programs, it's complementing them. So for example, NSERC and the Tri-Councils typically fund academic research. Programs like MyTax try to invest in innovation and industrial-based solutions to start SME, hopefully going towards SMEs and industrial capacity. But that's also one area where communities not as targeted by these grants. And additionally, you need to be associated with an academic partner for most of their grants, as well as funding directly from the government, such as the Industrial Research Assistance Program, that directly funds SMEs and up and coming technologies for hopefully to be innovative in the Canadian space. What the DIF or the Decentralized Innovation Framework will do is complement these programs by providing funding towards these organizations that are community driven, that want to do R&D and try to develop new solutions to solve their local problems. And you can almost see them as incubators or pre-incubation spaces where community is a stakeholder, and they can work with partners to try to develop solutions to the problems that's happening in their own spaces, such as in urban areas that are where underrepresented communities are involved, or rural areas, as well as Atlantic communities, areas that typically do not have the expansive R&D capacity. So these are all trying to address this, what I believe is something that's lacking in Canada, which is this receptor capacity, which is to be able to absorb the technological advancing that it's happening in industry and in academia towards community that can generate jobs, can generate economic and societal impact.
Equity is central to DIF. How does the framework actively promote inclusion to these underrepresented communities? And how does the policymaker measure whether this policy actively deliver more equitable outcome?
So at the heart of the decentralized innovation framework is equity focused, in the sense that, as mentioned, a lot of where innovation happens, a lot of community is not being able to be a stakeholder or participate. So they won't be able to, if they have ideas, people that are not outside of academic settings or industrial settings cannot typically access, or it's hard to access labs or spaces where they can try to take their ideas and turn it into innovation and impact. And remember, once again, that most of the funding in Canada is very highly centralized. If it's for discovery-based work to institutions, and typically the U15. So 84% of, let's say, one of our biggest infrastructure funds, the CIF, our CFI, is going just to those U15. So the DIF policy is all about trying to expand that capacity towards people that are not typically included in these spaces. So this could be Indigenous hubs, community labs, schools, libraries, maker spaces, science centers, areas where community have direct access, and they are trusted community organizations that can be not only science outreach spaces, but also be centers of innovation, or what I like to call nodes of innovation. So how to measure this from a policy standpoint, if this policy was put in place, is by understanding that where is the geological demographic of the funding going to? So where is all the funding going to across the country? Is it being centralized to highly urban study centers? Is it getting towards the north, or is it going towards the rural or Atlantic communities? As well as trying to understand the diversity of leadership in these spaces. So trying to understand the equity, the EDI metrics of leadership in these spaces. Also trying to see who is developing these technologies. So if participation is high, especially from underrepresented communities in these grants, that could be a form of success, as well as trying to understand if the solutions that are coming out of these grants, these small micro grants, are able to be sustainable and have local impact in these communities. So understanding how these services are these new services that hopefully will come out of these possible funding program, that students or these community members can have advantage over.
Perfect. If you could make 3 concrete asks from the policymaker that would accelerate DIF-style innovations in the next 12 to 24 months, what would these asks be?
The first ask would be to change eligibility rules for funding programs that are coming from Tri-Council, as well as any type of My Tax programs that are in partnership with government to widen the eligibility pool so that trusted community organizations can be not only partners but hosts of these grants. So I can envision 10 to 15, a small program where you could call the Decentralized Innovation Fund, to try to find 10 or 15 organizations to help them fund them, accredited them so that there is a space of accountability, so developing an accreditation program, as well as developing accessible online portal that is integrated between the federal, provincial, municipal, and the academic partners, industry partners, and community partners, where you can all access one digital portal where you can share funding opportunities across the board on all spectrum, as well as share data on how successful the projects are going, any type of information that might be useful towards the success of these projects, because in the academic or in the innovation system in Canada, a lot of the portals or these access to these information that can be critical in trying to accelerate discovery, to accelerate innovation, is fragmented and is siloed. So trying to develop an accessible portal that cuts bureaucracy of trying to understand what's going on in our innovation system can also be really useful in making these types of possible opportunities available for community.
What is your opinion on the value of the Canadian Science Policy Centre and its position in the community as a communication hub, connection hub, knowledge mobilizer, and talent incubator in Canada?
So for me, the Canadian Science Policy Centre has been the first place where I feel I can be an impactful member of society as a scientist and trying to understand what the national discussion around science and innovation is in Canada, as well as what each sector its needs are and their decision-making capacity is to try to help make a resilient and prosperous society in Canada. So I found being at the Canadian Science Policy Centre and being at this conference, as well as being a part of the Science Meets Parliament cohort this year, that I can understand a little bit more about what community is in the science and innovation space, and get to really understand that this is not just a research problem. This is a multipolar community that needs to try to solve how to support our innovation system in Canada. And I think CSPC is at the center of this, being a place where we can be in community and trying to understand and have difficult conversations, as well as new solutions, and try to get towards improving science and innovation in this country.